Court or any political institution in a democracy that has no women in it, right? And this might seem obvious to us in a group like this, but we might actually start by asking the question, why? Like, what's wrong with not having any women? Why is it important to have at least some? Or why is it important to have half, or at least half women? And I think that once we actually start to answer that question, we see how complicated and slippery some things can be. And it also raises this question of, well, what exactly is the relationship between women's participation in politics, creating bodies that are actually balanced, gender balanced, and problems of gender equality that are the subject of lawmaking itself. In the European context, this is one set of answers, right? Women are half the population. And what that means also is that women are not an interest group, right? There are a lot of groups that are lobbying for their interests, but you can't think of women that way because they're half the population. And what that means is that gender unequal institutions just lack the basic requirements of political legitimacy in a modern democratic society. And also, what's been very interesting in the context of parity movements in the European context is this idea that constitutions and constitutional amendments can play a really important role in expressing the principle that any democratic institution that's not gender equal is actually an illegitimate institution. And for over 100 years, both in the European context and in the United States, and actually longer than 100 years, women have participated in constitutional movements for gender equality around the world. A lot of attention is being drawn to the 19th Amendment, the movement for women's suffrage, because we have a centennial coming up. And it's worth noting that the United States is actually one of the few countries in the world that actually don't have a constitutional guarantee explicitly about equality for women. Equality for men and women, or sex equality, or a constitutional provision that prohibits gender discrimination. We're one of the very few. Most constitutions in Europe, Latin America, Asia, they all have a provision that is about equal rights for women or non-discrimination on grounds of sex. And part of the explanation in the United States for that is that because of the groundbreaking work of women lawyers, like then Justice Ginsburg, who was a lawyer for the ACLU Women's Rights Project in the 1970s. That's her many decades ago. And of course, there's now a film that portrays her struggles to get sex equality constitutionalized. And the strategy that was used in the 1970s was to argue that the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, which includes a general equal protection clause, actually prohibited sex discrimination. So it's worth taking a look at what that says, right? That is, it doesn't talk about men, it says all persons, right? It says all persons, and it also says, so it says all persons are citizens of the United States, and which has long been understood to include women, even though it doesn't say so explicitly. And it prohibits denying to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And so the very important project throughout the 1970s was to argue that meant you could not discriminate on the basis of sex, that would be unconstitutional. And interestingly, though,